Hi there, Kiwi Codger here, and welcome to episode 31, part 3 of the killing fields of Auckland. Part 2 finished with Kaea escaping from the overrun pa and coming across Hongi, who trapped his foot in the palisading. Hongi keeps him at bay by bluffing him with empty pistols. Kaea takes off once he sees reinforcements coming. Remember, Kaea is armed with a European short-handled adze, said to be made of brass, that was given to him by Captain Cruz the year before. So let's continue on with Anaru Makifara's account of the fall of Mauinaina and Mokoia. So we start from here. He had reached the riverbank at Te Pupu Akawao, fighting his way in the company with others of his people. When he had swum across the river and was about to land on the opposite shore with several companions, he returned in answer to the challenge of the Ngāpuhi Chiefs, Rewa, who was accompanied by Te Ihi of Ngati Paoa and a Rarawa Chief. Te Ihi sang out, "O Kaea, ahoy, this is me, Te Ihi." So Kaea swam back in response to this challenge. They had been comrades in arms during a war expedition on the east coast some years before. Okay, let's have a look at these two paragraphs. You would get the impression that Te Ihi and Te Kaea were old friends, but since their days in arms together, there has been an evolution of bad blood between their families, and now there are scores to settle. The place of Te Pupu Akawao is not on any modern-day maps. I originally thought that it was in this area here where you could yell across the river and be heard on the opposite side, but in fact that is not true. After much digging, I discovered that Te Pupu Akawao is this sandbank area here, and its modern-day name is Tahuna Torea, which is this area out here, and Tahuna means sandbank and Torea means the oyster catcher, so very appropriately named. Now between the pa here and the site at the end here is approximately 7 kilometres, and the possible route that Te Kaea and his mates would have taken is probably something like, I droned this area some time back. So let's go and have a look at that. So the first time I went to video this, I went out there. Unfortunately it was high tide, and at that time the Tahuna Torea is pretty much underwater, as you can see here. So I went back a few days later and did it when the tide was out. So obviously the duel that occurred there occurred at low tide. Now we'll just stop that there. In the distance here it's almost impossible to see, but this is the area where the Mauinaina and Mokoia pa were. And as we traverse across the Tamaki River here, we come to the Te Pupu Akawao. And I'm just going to drone up and down there. But on the end here is where the duel occurred. So where these fishermen are is the famous battle between Te Kaea and 3 chiefs from up north. I'm going to let that roll, and we'll continue on with the story. Now, if we assume that the pa was attacked near dawn, and that took a while to be overthrown, and then everyone scattering, then probably these duels occurred early morning-ish, mid-morning-ish. So let's just continue on with the account by Anaru. When Te Kaea landed, Rewa first engaged in combat with him, Rewa's weapon being a taiaha. Thereupon all those fighting in that vicinity ceased their fighting and looked on at the duel. They fought, and Kaea parried all Rewa's blows. Having struck twice, Rewa then retired, taunted thus by Kaea. Thy hand of Ray, 'tis a hand for cultivating food only. Then the Rarawa Chief stood forth. His weapon also was a taiaha. He likewise was twice discomfited by Kaea and retired from the contest. Then came Te armed with a koki patiti, which is a long-handled tomahawk. Having parried Te blows twice, Kaea was unprepared for the third blow aimed at him by Te with his left hand. Thus was Kaea killed. Now there's a number of famous battles, famous duels in Maori history, and this would rank in the top 5. So obviously there was an etiquette to these formal duels. It appears that each person has 2 attempts to land a blow, and if they are successful, then they win the duel and the loser retires. In the case of Te he does not retire, but swaps his tomahawk to the left hand and lands an unsuspecting killing blow. David Simmons is an authority on Maori history and culture in the Auckland area. He made 2 videos on Mauinaina and Mokoia before his passing in 2015. I shall leave links down below. He says that when Te shouted out his challenge, he would have stamped his right foot at the same time, a signal that this was duelling a one-on-one. He also indicates that Te'ihi's killer blow was an upward swing of his long-handled tomahawk to Kaea's groin. Let's continue on. The act of Te was disapproved of by the Ngapuhi host, and Rewa publicly reprimanded him, for the etiquette is not to persist after a second blow is received from an adversary in a duel. So the killing of Te Kaea with the underhanded blow was straight out murder, and was considered so by everyone watching. The shock and disgust was similar to that of another underarm incident by the Aussies some years back. At the time of the capture of Mauinaina and the death of Kaea, his father, Takurua, was absent on the above-mentioned war expedition to the east coast. He was returning home by way of Waikato when he heard of his son's death. So here they are referring to the Amiao Whenua, a group of participants from numerous tribes who went on a killing spree around New Zealand. On their journey home, they would learn that their homes had been decimated by hongi, and there was nothing to go back to. They would seek shelter with other iwi to whom they were related. So that's the story by Anaru Makifara, and let's now consider the aftermath of the fighting. Well, many prisoners would have been taken, and there would be the segregation of the slaves, or segregation of the prisoners as to who would be slaves and who would be wives. The rest would be executed, men, women and children. Now, you've got to remember that hongi needed workers for his plantations up north, so more would have been enslaved than usual. There's also all battles, the troops normally go and look for treasures, and you have a feeling that that would have happened here, as well as the crops, everything they needed, they would just take. They probably needed more canoes, so there was probably a hunt for the canoes of the Ngati Paoa, because they needed these to transport the enslaved people back up north. So yeah, and of course the preparation of the kaitangata and the cooking pits, the cannibal feast that were to follow. The gathering of tattooed heads for preservation. Now normally these would be the heads of the rangatira class of the Ngati Paoa. These are the heads that would have been tattooed. The common man normally didn't have facial tattoos, so they weren't much worth to the trade in heads. The Ngapuhi dead were probably gathered and cremated. Maybe the rangatira, a few of the rangatira would have been preserved to be taken up back to the Bay of Islands. No account of this is given. This is all conjecture anyway. You'd also assume that there would be mop-up parties, so would be sent out to kind of kill stragglers. Now, there's a number of caves around Auckland, volcanic caves, which are purported to have sheltered the refugees during this period. But of course, they wouldn't have stayed in those caves for too long. And it is said that the refugees were fleeing to the Waitakaris, Awhitu Peninsula. Some were going down to the Thames, to the Te Tautrapa area, and others were fleeing to the Waikato. After stench of rotting corpses becomes too great, which is around 5 to maybe 10 days, the victors move on to their new target, the Ngati Maru at Te Tautra in the Thames. The Panmure area becomes tapu, and Tamaki Makarau and surrounds is depopulated, and will remain so until 1840 when the town of Auckland is established. Panmure becomes a fencible village and is established in 1842. Now, the fencibles report the skeletal remains of approximately 2,000 people are still visible after 20 years. These would have been the Ngati Paoa bones. Many think this number is an exaggeration, but I think it's actually conservative. Now, there are other stories associated with the fall of the Tupā. One has Hongi battling in the open using a V formation to maximise his firepower. Another has Ngapuhi building a raised platform to shoot down into Mauinaina. One account has it that the siege was going so poorly that Hongi was going to give up until a Ngāpuhi Chief from the Hokianga, Patuoni, convinced him to carry on. There is the bizarre account that was told to Marsden by Ngapuhi. They told Marsden what he wanted to hear, that Ngapuhi had gone down to Auckland on a reconciliation trip and were attacked by a crazy Hanaki. The first casualty of war is the truth. An interesting aside is that 3 Europeans living with the Ngati Paoa were reportedly killed in the battle. I still feel Anaru Makifara's account, although brief, is the closest to the truth. Anyway, that's where this final part of the Killing Fields of Auckland ends. Episode 32 will be on Hongi leaving the stench of Tamaki Makarau and heading for Thames, where he has a few scores to settle with the Ngati Maru. So until then, take it easy and stay safe out there.